This time it's 5 motorbikes with enclosed bodywork. Machines with enclosed bodywork. It's something we tend to associate with scooters, isn't it? And we tend to imagine that bikes of this nature were really done to sort of fill the gap in between scooters and motorcycles. But in reality, enclosed bodywork on motorcycles predates the existence of scooters of that type at all. And machines with a decent level of weather protection have been in development since the very early days of the motorcycle. And so here are 5 classic examples. The Ascot Pullin. The Ascot Pullin was the brainchild of one Sir Pullin. Pullin was a man for all seasons, inventor, designer and TT racer, winning a TT in 1914. Pullin dreamed of creating a machine which was years ahead of its time, pressed steel bodywork replacing tubular steel, and hydraulic brakes too. The largest machine had a 500cc overhead valve 4-stroke engine, which was mounted horizontally in the bike, rather like motor gutsis of the period. The frame and front suspension units were all pressed steel, and were designed to enclose that smelly oily engine and drive system away from the rider. The Ascot was not his first pressed steel design, having first deployed the principles on a smaller 2-stroke machine. Production began in Letchworth in Hertfordshire in 1928, but would sadly end by 1930 with just over 400 machines actually completed. The Ascot may have been the machine of the future, but Pullin had great difficulty persuading the slightly conservative motorcyclists of the time to part with their hard-earned cash. And given the relatively small size of the company, the high price of the machine certainly wouldn't have helped. The Triumph 3TA and Speed Twin. The first of the range, Triumph's 3TA, arrived in 1957 and replaced the earlier 3T, the A of course standing for alternator. And while it looks similar, the new 3TA engine was completely different than the ordinary 3T, running a bore and stroke of 58.25 by 65.5. There was aluminium heads on cast iron barrels, compression ratio was 7.5 to 1, and the engine produced around 18.5 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. But undoubtedly the most notable change to the engine was the move to unit construction, and this produced a lighter, more compact power unit. This unit was then bunged into the rather flimsy looking swan neck frame, which was then enclosed in the rather extensive bodywork, with the rear end in particular gaining the nickname the Bathtub. At the front was a rather curvaceous mudguard, which is said to be one of the most effective ever fitted to a motorcycle, and the whole lot was topped off with a Yara-inspired nacelle instrument cluster. There were 7-inch single leading shoe drum brakes front and rear, and these were laced to, unusual for the time, 17-inch wheels. Turner saw the whole design as being rather futuristic, as demonstrated by Triumph's advertising slogan, "A bike with a wheel in tomorrow." In concept, the machine is slightly different from the Pullin. The bodywork's there to protect you from the elements, while unlike the Pullin, the engine is allowed to chuck oil all over your trousers. From 1959, the machine was joined by the larger 5TA, a unit construction version of the Speed Twin. Although the engine was now 490cc with a bore and stroke of 69 by 65.5, and peak power was handily raised to around 27 horsepower. And as with the 3TA, the 5TA was considerably lighter than its predecessor, weighing in at around 340 pounds, despite all that extensive tinware. The machines did sell pretty well, although most people still didn't like the extensive bodywork. Many younger riders ditched the tinware to give the machines a more sporty look. The 3TA would last until 1966, although latterly the bodywork would become increasingly less extensive. And by the end of the 60s, these touring models had been phased out, leaving only the sporting Tiger models in the range. The Aerial Leader. The Aerial Leader was one of the most technically innovative offerings of the post-war British industry, with the futuristic 2-stroke being designed from scratch as a vehicle of mass transport, with the rider protected both from the elements and that smelly 2-stroke engine. And that engine was a thoroughly modern job, with a bore and stroke of 54 by 54 for a parallel twin of 249cc. Peak power was 17.5 horsepower at 6,750 RPM, to give a top speed of around 73 miles an hour, despite the rather bulbous bodywork. Optional extras included a clock, directional indicators and hard luggage. The machine was the work of legendary designer Val Page and Bernard Knight, and it was Knight who would go on to develop the naked arrow version. Now, while the machine was not exactly a commercial failure, it never sold in the numbers that had been hoped for, and struggled to cover the high tooling costs of all that pressed steel work. Another problem was the BSA management, who failed to comprehend the potential of the design, and in particular that parallel twin two-stroke engine, with the company favouring its own C15 single-cylinder four-stroke unit instead. And that lack of development would ultimately result in increasingly reducing sales, giving the BSA management just the excuse they needed to end production in 1965. The Ner-A Car. The Ner-A Car is one of the most genuinely innovative motorcycles ever designed, and as a concept owed very little to what had gone before. Even the machine's name was a double play on words, with the machine being Ner-A Car, but it was also the work of Carl Ner-A. Carl worked out of Syracuse, New York State, where he built his first machines in 1921. He conceived it as being more stable and more comfortable than a conventional motorcycle of the period, and those voluptuous mudguards provided the type of protection only seen on later scooters. And at the front was hub centre steering. In fact, the Ner-A Car was the most commercially successful hub centre steering motorcycle until the advent of the Yamaha GTS in the early 90s. And rather surprisingly, so successful was this American design that it was actually built under licence in the United Kingdom. Now in the UK, the machine could be specified with a range of different engines. Jap four-stroke engines were sometimes fitted, but the most commonly used engine was of course the two-stroke Villiers. Sheffield Simplex, who built the British version, did have some success initially, but sales eventually began to dwindle, this being a rather unusual machine after all. And so in 1926, production of the Ner-A Car in Great Britain came to a close. The Francis Barnett Cruiser 250. The original version of the Cruiser 250 arrived in the early 1930s and featured a 250 Villiers deflector piston two-stroke engine. The frame featured pressed steel elements, and there was an enclosure around the engine, as well as leg shields for the rider, while the exhaust emptied out into a large chamber which curved out in the front of the motor. Production of the original machine ended with the Second World War. However, with the 1950s, the company was now under AMC control, and so Francis Barnett, like James, was persuaded to use the new AMC Piatti design two-strokes instead of its previous Villiers motors. And when this engine was enlarged out to 250cc, it seemed a great opportunity to reintroduce the Cruiser 250. Unlike the original machine, the new model featured a fairly conventional chassis, although there was extensive bodywork, particularly at the rear, and a large mudguard at the front. The engine on the new Cruiser was of 249cc, with a bore and stroke of 66 by 73, and featured a rather unusual transfer port arrangement, something which would prove problematic on earlier machines. Later machines, however, were much better put together, actually being assembled at the Villiers plant. And on the subject of Villiers, the engines would make a return for the final version of the Cruiser. This would feature a 4T parallel twin engine and would add slightly better performance than the AMC unit, with peak power somewhere around 17 horsepower. And production of the Cruiser range would continue through until 1966 and the ultimate demise of the AMC concern. Whatever bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us cover in a future video? Maybe get a bike we can feature in a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.